Hello, I want to talk about the great horror of Revelations and what she actually is. A lot of people are confused because television and radio has really made a mockery of the whole entire Bible per se. They're taking content strictly out of Revelation and not considering the prophets and what they said about it. And when you don't listen to the prophets, you don't have the wisdom, you don't have the Holy Spirit, which is called the wisdom in the Proverbs, and so you end up making a mockery out of it. And basically, um, you have a church. There's two churches in Revelation, and they're considered two females. And why would you do this? Well, when you go back to the Bible and Genesis, it'll talk about the man leaves the father and the mother and joins with the wife, and the two shall become one. Everybody knows that if you've been in any kind of marriage vow. But what the Bible is talking about is when it says the man, it's always referring to Jesus Christ, and um, and that man left heaven, left his father in heaven, came here to this earth, left the mother country, Jerusalem, heaven, um, if you know when the New Jerusalem comes down, that's the name of heaven. It's the New Jerusalem. Well, he leaves the old Jerusalem and he comes down and marries his bride, which is the people. And when you do that, you receive the Holy Spirit, which is basically your wedding ring. Emmanuel, God with us. And so the Holy Spirit within you is your mark of ownership, is his mark of ownership on you. It's like a wedding ring. And so when you understand that concept as a Christian, that everybody should know that we're the bride of Christ, not this um, building over there that's supposed to be a church or whatever. The church is you, the within you. God is in your holy of holies, which is your heart. And God, Jesus said, heaven is inside, and that's what he's talking about. And you're the temple. Everybody should know that, being a Christian. But when you go to the days of Moses, Moses, when he was extracting the people out of Egypt, um, God made a covenant with the people, and that covenant the people agreed upon that they would only worship God and no other gods before Him. So God makes a marriage contract basically with His people, and that's what you get the Ten Commandments and also the 613 mitzvah laws that the Jewish people follow, which is really the Old Testament laws. Everybody should be following, but that's the marriage contract. And when you read the prophets, what's going to end up happening is you're going to see that there's a woman that's married, and they break the covenant marriage with God, and that's why God allowed slavery to happen. And so what happened is was Dan, the tribe of Dan, led Israel, basically the Israelites, basically into idolatry, and that's a type of spiritual adultery. When you read the Ten Commandments, that that adultery is not talking about woman and man. It's talking about your relationship with God. You should not commit adultery against God. And we know this is clear because when you read the prophets, it'll constantly use women as a as the church or the people who are actually in a covenant with God, a blood covenant with God. And we know that blood covenant later on as Jesus Christ died on the cross. But Abraham sealed that blood covenant. The blood covenant was sealed with Adam and Eve when God killed the animals and put the animal skins on them. I mean, that blood covenant is passed all the way through. And that's where you get the matrimony, sexual union. The hymen is broken, and there is a pure relationship there. And so that's what that means. You dedicate yourself to God. And so when you think other than that, you're committing adultery. And God said, when you enter Moses, when you enter the country, do not use falsehood or paganism traditions from that country and call it God worship. He'll disband you from the kingdom forever, and that kingdom is heaven, the Jerusalem, and which is the new bride. Um, so Dan had led the people in idolatry, and then later Jezebel led the people into Baal worship. And we know this by Elijah fighting Jezebel all the time about who was the true God. And the people had fallen away so much from God worship, basically due because of Solomon's wives that he allowed to build temples into the country, and it led more idolatry into it. Solomon was big in idolatry worship for a little while, and that's why he came in to write the book of Ecclesiastes later on. But they fell away from God worship, and so God punished them. And Jezebel hunted down the Elijah, and that's why when you go to Revelations, you'll see the lady that's being hunted down by the dragon, the serpent, and is protected in the desert. It's following the story of Elijah. He ran into the desert being protected by Jezebel. I mean, being trying to get away from Jezebel and being protected by the angels and that fed Elijah and stuff. And they couldn't find him. And they didn't know where he was. And for 3 years they looked for him. So the story goes along with that. Not just Jesus' story where he goes into the desert of Egypt. But so so when the prophets go to the leaders of the day, the reason they come up to the leaders of the day, um, they always associated parables and analogies and figuratory speech, and they came to the leaders and they pretty much said, they use sexual connotation to show that they're committing adultery against God. And he would consider the wise. There was a civil war in the book of Kings, and Israel split apart. You have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom was Judah. Its capital was Jerusalem. The northern kingdom was the 10 tribes that we consider the lost 10 tribes, but their capital was Samaria. And so anytime the prophets came up there, that he would talk about how the the um, the women with like Babylonian or Assyrian lovers. And what they were doing is they were giving themselves over to false worship. And it was always denoted with sexual connotation. And so when you see that relationship with God as a bride, then the great whore or the great horror is like God coming into his home, his house, his temple, and seeing his wife sleeping with somebody he shouldn't be sleeping with. And Jeremiah points that out when he sees the Queen of Heaven statue, which is basically Ishtar out of Babylon, um, in the temple. What is it doing here? Why do we have this Queen of Heaven in this temple when you were supposed to be worshiping God? So, so the prophets pointed that out, and that's the reason why they were killed out for it. And so it's always been the Christian or the Hebrew or Israelite religious order that was always supposed to be following God in His covenant marriage, but they've been masking paganistic religions as God worship. And Christians say, "Well, we don't do that. The Catholics do that." Beg your pardon. The Catholics had many daughters, and that's what the whore had. She had many daughters. You had the Lutherans come out of them. You had the Greek Orthodox. You had the Protestants came out of there, and pretty much every Christian religion out there came out of there. So those are the daughters of the whore. Anytime you follow the traditions of men, you follow the doctrines that are not in the Bible, and when you're worshiping Christian holidays that are paganistic, devil worshiping holidays of the sun worship, moon worship, and Venus worship that came straight out of Babylon. And that's why this great whore is called the great whore of Babylon, the mystery religion, because it's not a mystery, it's what they worship. It's their type of mystery. If anybody who studied mythology knows it's called the mystery religion in Rome, Greece, Egypt, and Babylon. That's the religion order. And so this great whore is basically religious order that's supposed to be in a covenant marriage with God, and they're sleeping around with paganistic ideas. And you can see this also as they're sleeping with Balaam. The book of Jude tells you they sleep with Balaam. And what is Balaam doing? He got rich off using God's word. That's prosperity teaching in the church. The way of Korah. Korah wanted a rebellion against Moses to get his power. So you got a lot of people in the church that want to use the church to control people. They get high off power, egotistic trips. That's what you consider a Pharisee of that day, in Jesus' day. Then you have the way of Cain. Those are the people that will tell a lie. They're envious of you. They for doing what's right. They hunt you down. That's why the devil was hunting down this woman in Revelation, is because Jezebel was just as jealous of Elijah's power. One man conquered 400 Baal prophets, and it wasn't one man; it was God Himself doing it. And so they're jealous of the power that is being used like through people that are common folks that has no education, never went to seminary, um, ex drug addicts, ex criminals who are coming to God and telling you the truth, and it's slapping these religious Christians right in the face, and they get mad and they get upset, and that's the way of Cain. They're willing to murder you, and Jesus said it will be brother against brother, just like it was in the Catholic Inquisitions. It'll happen again, and so you'll have this mass society acting like Jesus, looking like Jesus, doing the miracles of Jesus, claiming they're healing in Jesus' name, and Jesus says, "I don't know who you are. Get away from me, you wicked people." And that's a false Christianity church, and they're teaching the lies, and they're teaching Jezebel. That's what Jesus said. I'll lay Jezebel on a bed to see who sleeps with her. In other words, if it's freaking whore. If the person that's supposed to be in a marriage covenant with me is going to be a spiritual whore, I'm not talking about somebody just going out and having sex. I'm talking about somebody who's taking ideas and concepts that are not God's concepts. They're taking a religion and trying to get right with God when in reality that's witchcraft. If you go, you're taking formulas, um, scientific, mathematical formulas to get right with God. If I pray this prayer, if I do this, if I light this candle, I do. That's sorcery. That's witchcraft. You're punished by death. And then you turn around and mock God by worshiping the sun and calling them Christian holidays. Every one of those are Baal worship holidays. And everybody knows it. It prints it out in the paper every time the holidays come around. And people know, but they don't care. They love their sin more than they love God. And that's why God would allow them to go to the Assyrians and the Babylonians, because if they want to worship their gods, He'll let them be with their gods, hoping they'll come back. But there's a time when they're not going to be coming back. They're going to be marked by ownership of the devil. They want to. God didn't like divorce. God didn't want to divorce you, because if you got divorced from God, you went straight to hell to be with your lover, Satan, who worships, you worship your morning star, Lucifer, the one who fell. That morning star they're talking about is the sun god. Most religions follow it, including Christianity. Wake up, your false Christianity is the great whore. It is a horror, and it is an abomination of desolation. Thank you.